Righto, Mr Lithium is back in town, a new best friend from America.
He sure is.
Oh, what a bloody GC. I think he likes us more than we like him. He really likes us. I even featured on his podcast doing an ad for it.
You did, and he gave us a kind shout out as well. Guys, I've been itching to do this one. What are we going to talk about, Matty? You let us in.
We thought that since we're spodumene, why not talk about all the other lithium, which is such a big bloody part. Spodumene is not the only lithium for anyone out there that was wondering if you listen to this show.
That's it.
So we thought, let's get into two-parter because we went for a couple of hours. We're going to get into brine, get into DLE, we get into all the sedimentary stuff.
Yep, we touch a bit on China as well and the impact they're having, and a bit on the supply-demand impact. Yep. You know, it's been in hot debate the last couple of weeks.
Hot, JD, hot as anything, mate. Going into summer, but it's okay. Part one, we go brine and the 101 on DLE, and then the further stuff on DLE and oil field brine and all that sort of sedimentary stuff goes into part two.
Awesome.
So looking forward to it.
Let's get to it.
We're excited, mate.
Oh, no. So on lithium, this is not my tricky way of going into sponsorship either. This is a true story. We went to the Delta AGM the other day, JT. You didn't. You held the fort, but me and Trav thought we thought that'd be an interesting one to go to with Mr. Ellison and Mr. Thurlow joining the board.
And what do you guys think?
Compliments to the best pastries served afterwards. It wasn't just savoury biscuits. The pastries were bloody beautiful.
Yeah, the corporate cost going to a good cause there.
Probably it would have been $50 worth, but it's just the thought that counts. So you got to compliment them on the little wins there. But Trav, what about inside the AGM? What did you think?
Oh, it was a bit of a non-event for the most part, I thought. Yeah, I mean, like it was a relatively quick-ish AGM.
A couple of comments I heard on how Chris Ellison likes to separate the various hats he has to wear.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that there was only a couple of questions that people brought, and they were both
related
directed to Mr. Ellison and Minrez.
Yeah, the votes were like relatively overwhelmingly in favour of both of them going on the board. So it actually, if Waratah still holds 10%, it looks like they actually voted for as opposed to against.
Waratah and Idemitsu, yep.
Yeah, very very interestingly. But yeah, I mean, the shareholders had actually rocked up. There were two questions in relation to Minrez's influence. Chris Ellison sounds convincing when he talks. But
conviction.
I didn't believe him.
Any questions on hubris?
Well, he's very clear on the statements that he wanted to get them into production as quick as possible. So that was and saying that they want to increase the value of their investment in Delta. So inferring that, well, if it increases for them, it increases for the Delta shareholders as well. But no mentions of what happened in the past or anything. But
awesome. And I've heard they've punched an almighty amount of kilometres into the ground across Mount Ida and Unithara. Trav, did you tell me 230 kilometres of drilling?
250.
150.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Huge number.
It'll be interesting to see how it pans out, whether you would assume that Mount Ida is the first focus to get a concentrator there and get producing.
Yeah, we'll see, won't we?
Unithara is obviously bigger scale, but appears to be a lot lower grade than, I guess, what we're used to seeing. So, yeah.
Good stuff, gents.
We'll have our eyes on it. So we get into the Argentina today in the lithium, and I thought, boys,
the Argentina.
Once we bloody make it in this media industry, why not take your pick from one of these to travel over there? Which one would you pick?
The one on the left, mate.
Yeah, that's the Learjet, the Brooks Learjet. I don't know if the other one would make it. You'd probably have to refuel at Sydney, New Zealand, probably Adelaide,
I don't think
Sydney,
either would make it.
Hit at New Zealand, drop in at Hawaii on the way.
Is that a hangar? Do they call that a hangar where the jets?
Yeah,
I think so.
We should film a podcast inside the hangar, and you just got like a jet in the background, and it's like we film an interview with someone with just a big jet in the background. We look like we're
rich
dogs.
Yeah, why not? So, mate, Stewie Brooks, if you can let us know what the mileage is on these, the fuel range, and if there's some Brooks capability to take us to the Atacama in Argentina would be bloody in like Flynn.
That's it.
Discount sponsored rate, obviously.
But in any doubt, if you are a Delta, that would be a great candidate.
Oh, Delta.
Yeah.
You want to start flying to Mount Ida and Unithara?
Get in touch with Brooks Airways.
Get in touch. The new charter business for the FIFO industry. It was a lot of legacy companies there. Brooks are coming in.
And Matty, how many of these jets have they got?
Shitloads, mate.
Shitloads.
6. What have they got? 6, 7 King Airs. They're the Land Cruisers. 6 Learjets. Just
over a dozen of these things,
mate. If you want to be responsible with your money, you can fly a King Air. You want to be rich, you can fly a Learjet. The options are endless.
So when you're flying out to your site, you take the one. When you're flying the investors and everything out, you take the other.
Yeah, that's good. Good. Look after. Yeah, good responsible use of the shareholder money.
That's it. Well.
That was being sarcastic.
Thanks for clarifying.
Mate, the new bloody force in FIFO travel. Fly in, fly out planes. That's why they call it fly in, fly out. Brooks Airways, 1300 Airway. Give them a buzz.
Love your work.
Thank you, JD. Now, there's been a couple of interesting comments on YouTube. There's a good theme going that pretty much when a guest starts talking really technical, everyone sees my eyes drifting off and assuming I don't understand it. And there's like this narrative like, oh, there we go. Matty's a bit too dumb for that. But I've had a bit of contrasting feedback come in.
Have you? Yeah. Who's this come from, mate?
It's come from
Anonymous.
A lovely French fella that has sent in that thinks I'm
really bloody smart.
Really bloody smart. Oh, mate, tell you what, nothing that, and they're paying us. Like the fact that they're sending that favour in and compliments for me, just like I guess validates maybe it's not going over my head.
Absolutely, mate.
Thanks, Zav. JP Search, the financial recruitment gurus. You explain it. You explain the niche probably better than me, Trav. How would you explain it to the money miners?
I just liked one of Zav's posts on LinkedIn. Actually, I reckon I should just bloody read that one out because he said even though it's December, don't forget about swapping jobs. Swap jobs in December. And he goes, please don't put your search on hold because we are December tomorrow. I'm still looking for at least 5 analysts/associates, PE, healthcare, real estate, infrastructure, family office, mining. My clients are ready to interview today.
Oh, mate.
And they will wrap up the process for the right candidate before Christmas. PM me for more info.
Oh, mate, and like Xavier looks after his clients that much. He's actually got them in his lounge room, like feeding them and everything. Like they are literally at his house ready to be interviewed.
Yeah.
Like watching Netflix and stuff, probably passing a bit of time. But that is the service. Like when he says they are ready to be interviewed, like he will just literally hand the phone to them. That's what separates JP Search from the competitors, I think, boys.
Yeah.
It's just top level financial recruitment.
Give yourself a free Christmas present and call Zach.
Give yourself a bonus.
Give yourself a free. You want a free bonus? Give JP Search a call, and they could probably get you a package that contains shitloads of bonuses.
That's it. Cheers, JP Search.
Love your work, Michael and Zav. Righto, boys. Let's get into Mr Lithium, part one of 2.
Let's rip it.
Let's rip it. I'm stopping talking. Goodbye. Righto, boys. I'll start with a joke.
Okay.
If Joe Lowry had a son, what would he call him?
You tell me, Matty.
Brine.
I'm slow.
Oh, Mr. Lithium, welcome back.
And my second child would be Spod.
Oh, the things I think about on the freeway to work. How are you, Cobber?
I'm good.
Right.
But you've given me another thing to do every day because when I get up, let the dog out, feed the dog, and then I look for the Money of Mine podcast offering.
Cheers for the free advertising on the potty, Cobber. Oh, then again, I'm giving free advertising to Zolanders.
Hey, I've got a 13-year-old Kiwi that's going to be side by side with you on the next episode.
Oh, very, very good, mate. Right, Big Joe, we wanted to have you back on to essentially talk lithium bar hard rock. Because most of the stuffs we talk about, pretty much I'd say 98% is spodumene, hard rock. We thought let's go bloody balls deep into brines, DLE, sedimentary hosted, bit on the downstream. I'd say should be a logical two-parter, boys, but I thought let's give the other side of the lithium world the credit it deserves.
We're starting from a low base, Matty.
Yeah. We've got the low base knowledge with a high base interviewee we've got here.
Well, you're
the man for the job, aren't you? You better not bugger it up, Joe.
Let's hear you say smack over.
So something about ack, like the k sound. You got smack over, you got thack or pass,
over,
you got the Atacama. It's wildcat. Wildcat. I'm glad that's taken off. Right. How about we start with the brines, and no doubt the brines will go into the DLE chat. And the first question I'll ask Big Joe is DLE, and we'll get into what they are, is DLE going to replace the processing for brines? Like the evaporation style, is DLE going to be? Are they going to be an interchangeable thing? Brines is where the lithium is, and DLE will be the processing, or will this evaporation in Argentina, will that still be a thing if DLE gets proven up? Just for my own bloody thing here, just to make sure I understand it properly.
Well, when I'm talking to high caliber people such as your good selves, I like to be very clear. I do not think that ponds will go away. I think DLE, the real promise of DLE is in places like the Smackover, where you can't do evaporation. DLE will be used in South America more as a supplement rather than a replacement. And it can be bolted on, can increase recoveries in the Atacama or in places in the other side of the Andes in Argentina where you have pond operations. But people aren't going to scrap their ponds because of DLE. In the future, more projects may gravitate to DLE, but as we don't have a full-scale commercial DLE operation without ponds in existence yet, that is TBD.
Right. Now that I know that, I've saved 8 dumb questions that would have come out of my mouth, so I know that. Let's start with brines, mate. Can you give the 101 on brines, the current brine production, what the flow sheet looks like and how it works in the likes of Argentina and Chile?
Well, if you go to Chile, originally an operation like SQM, lithium was a byproduct. So those ponds were originally managed for their potash operation. It wasn't until I was there in December of 16, I took CATL down there to meet the powers that be at SQM and went out to the Solar, and they said, look, we're just now starting to run this for lithium primarily and not for potash. So you have to look at it with those eyes. Albemarle is different. Albemarle, that was originally brine for lithium. They did a little byproduct potash, but the scale of those two operations is completely different because SQM was massive because it was for potash.
It's amazing to think that SQM was once upon a time a potash dominant company instead of the lithium giant it is today.
Well, it was iodine too, and you're going to have to excuse me for 1 second. I got to let my dog in the room because she has FOMO and she's scratching. Come on.
Maybe the dog's called Brian.
No, the dog is called Fiona.
Oh,
good Irish name.
There you go. Okay, so what's can you sum up the basic process of extracting the brine and then from that extracting the lithium?
It depends on the type of brine you have, but the brine fields are very shallow. You don't have to drill very deep, a few hundreds of meters or less. And the brine's pumped up into a pond, and then it depends on what's in the brine, what you do first. But you have a series of ponds, and different reagents are put in to drop out impurities, liming, but you have a series of ponds where not only do you concentrate, but you also try to take something out at each stage. Ultimately, in 12 to a lot of people will say it takes 2 years. Nobody's taking 2 years in their ponds. But the real important point on the whole thing where the DLE guys will say they're 10,000 times faster, which is abject nonsense. Once you get to a final salar brine and put it in the carbonate plant, the time to make carbonate's the same as DLE.
Yeah.
So,
So
once you get a pond system in steady state, and what you do when you're building an operation, let's just take Kachari for an example, because that's the most recent project to go into production.
Who owns Kachari again?
Gangfen and Lithium Argentina. Lithium Americas Argentina.
Yeah.
It's in Jujuy. It's right next to Allchem's operation, which is Olaroz. And so this, you've got a 12 to 12 plus or minus residence time in the ponds. It's the 2-year thing. I don't know anybody who's running 2 years, but that's what the DLE guys like to say.
So 12 months, you're saying?
12 months is reasonable. In Hombre Muerto, because Livent does a adsorption process before they go into the ponds, the pond residence time's less. That's the whole purpose of that. But you're basically concentrating and purifying in the same sequence. Once you get to a final salar brine, it goes into the carbonate plant, and different people some people put 3% in, some people put 1% in. It just depends on what makes your economics work. But you're putting a pretty low concentration of lithium into that carbonate plant. And but it's still the lowest cost. There is no existing hard rock operation that can compete on cost with world-class brine.
And how does the water work? Because I see the key difference they say in the headlines between DLE and the current brine operations is that the brine operations require water to be added, and then the DLE doesn't, and the DLE brine gets pumped back into the field.
Well, that
true or not, or false, or grey in between?
Well, I think it's defining terms. For example, brine's not water. If you drank a gallon of Atacama brine, you probably would be 6 feet under 3 days hence. That's kind of the logic with the kind of tree huggers that want to make brine look bad. They talk about, well, you're stealing the water. Well, brine's not water. Brine's a liquid, but brine's not water. And so you're evaporating the water part of the brine. Yep. But when you start getting into the water argument, it's really about how much water you need to run your operation. If you're doing DLE, if you have to rinse your columns with pure water, it's how good you are, how much water you need, and you have to wash the columns. If you have adsorption columns, you got to have pure water to wash out those columns. In some cases, DLE uses more water than a brine or than a conventional pond operation would. But the people that want to make the argument against ponds will say that you're evaporating all this water. Well, if you're evaporating the brine, whatever goes into the atmosphere is going to do what evaporated liquid does. It's going to come down somewhere, or so that it's really a mischaracterization of what's happening in my mind.
So going through the ponds, are the key items or metrics the lithium concentration, the impurity levels, and then the amount of reagents that are added in, and then any weather event obviously affects the lithium concentration. So if you get to that final pond and it rains and dilutes it, it just throws the whole. It's like bloody running the 100-metre race and tripping over in the last 5 metres.
Well, the Usain Bolt analogy is compelling. So I do like that 100-meter dash.
It'd
analogy.
probably actually be a marathon because it takes so bloody long. But you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I think we're doing this at a very simplified level. It's important that each pond's job is done properly, and if that gets out of sequence, or you have what you call sick ponds because the process isn't working as it's supposed to be, that causes problems. Rain events aren't that big a deal in the Atacama, although there was a time when if they were having any kind of production problems in the Atacama, they would just tell the Asians, "Oh, it rained."
Oh yeah, we get that. We got all these unforeseen weather events in WA mining as well, mate, around quarterly season. So what are the main impurities that have to be dropped out?
Well, I mean, it's some of it happens in the carbonate plant, some of it happens in the ponds, or to some degree happens in the ponds. But yeah, you always hear about the mag to lithium ratio, so that's probably number one. Boron.
So magnesium, is it?
Yeah. And then you want obviously the whole with the battery industry. I mean, these, like SQM's original plant was not designed for battery, because when they designed it, the lithium ion battery wasn't really a thing. Same is true with Livent, all those operations. So they weren't worried about getting to PPB of anything. It was PPM, and that's been one of the big changes to the industry in the last few years, is that it's hard once a plant's designed and operating to just say, okay, well, we don't want 400 ppm of calcium, we want 2, or sodium, whatever it is. And that's when you're looking at battery, you're looking at any metallic thing is, they use a lot of magnets now to take the last few bits of any contamination out of these things. And none of these plants were designed like that. And that was always my response to the Japanese when they would say, well, we want PPB. I'd say, look, man, this plant's older than I am. So if you want, I said, the analogy I always drew with the Japanese when I was driving them to the plant, and our hydroxide plant. So I'll get a little off cue because hydroxide is made from carbonate. But I'd say, do you like bread? And they'd say, oh, Lowry-san, we love bread. And I would say, well, think of this as a bakery, but not in Japan, in France. And it's 500 years old. And there's like stuff on the floor, and there's dust around, it's flour in the air. But it makes the best damn bread you've ever had. That's the way you need to think about our hydroxide plants. Because there's water on the floor, there's solution on the floor, whatever, and it doesn't look great, but it makes the best hydroxide in the world. And I think those explanations used to work. They don't work anymore because people are just so demanding, and you just really have to. And that's the thing with DLE now. The people designing DLE plants have the luxury of knowing what the battery industry needs. And when most of the plants that supplied the battery industry for the first 20 years it existed were designed before the lithium ion battery existed. And so making bolt-on improvements wasn't easy.
I want to just close off the water thing. What freshwater requirements are there for these brine operations? Like, is the first pond containing the brine extracted, is there any water added to that, like fresh groundwater, or is it just the brine?
The water that you're talking about is to run your plant operations.
Yeah, so there's nothing added into the evaporation process.
Yeah. I'm not going to say nothing because I can't talk to the specific because everybody's brine operations. But if you're trying to evaporate brine to concentrate it, you're probably not going to add more liquid.
Yeah. So the whole water thing, the water usage is the way they're sort of spinning it, saying because they're extracting the brine, they're classing that as the water.
Hitting the water table.
Yeah.
let's be clear on the fact also that in the Atacama, the issue is as you pump out more brine, you're moving the barrier. There's a freshwater brine barrier, and where people draw fresh water, and you're messing with the interface. That's a problem too. So it's not that simple just with the ponds. It's the more brine you pump, as you pull it, there in any system like that, there's an interface where the brine and the whatever the local fresh water is there's a border, and you can have issues there too. So it goes beyond just the pond system. It goes basically, and that's more of a problem in the Atacama than on the other side of the Andes. But they're very sensitive. There's a lot of tourism in the Atacama. I mean, all the A-listers for a while were going down to the Atacama to, spend a little time in the desert, the driest place on earth. And if you have a tourism operation, you don't want it mucked up by the lithium guys.
So with after the whole evaporation process, what is the end product on site at a brine operation? What does it look like once it goes through the upstream process?
Let's define on site, because if you take an SQM, they have to truck the brine a fairly significant distance to their carbonate plant. But if you talk about,
is that in a crystal form when they're trucking it? Is it all pure liquid?
It's a lithium chloride solution. If you look at a brine operation, even if you look at a DLE operation, what your carbonate plant feed is a lithium chloride solution.
Yeah.
It just depends on whether it's 1% LICL or 6% LICL.
Okay, so it's a lithium enriched brine, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so that varies site to site. What is disposed of on site? Is there any, so that in that case where they're trucking the final pond, essentially, is there anything is there a tailings? Is there anything disposed of?
Are there salts that become waste?
That is the $64,000 question on DLE. Because if you're going to do DLE, you have to re-inject the brine into the salar. If you're going to re-inject the brine into the salar and you use something like chemical reagents, if you don't get the chemicals out, then you're going to have a problem. So that's really right now, what people are going through is how is the government going to allow reinjection? And sometimes it's in a case like Livent, you're just putting what you don't use out on the ground, and it's trickling back through the ground into the salar or wherever you put the spent brine. But spent brine's got to go someplace.
Yeah. So when they drop the impurities out, are they settling to the bottom of the pond? Are they fully neutralizing?
And then
they're all settling.
Then you clean it out. I mean, that's the thing with a pond system. Ponds have liners, and that's one of the problems. If you're doing potash and the potash is going to the bottom and then you're digging that out or whatever, you have to have a system where your pond, you have lithium entrainment in that material. And, I can't tell you what every brine operation is going to do with that stuff. But, over time, obviously, if you're dropping stuff out, the level of the pond is going to have a solid mass on the bottom, and that's going to have to get dealt with.
So that final lithium enriched chloride, the lithium chloride solution, what is the processing step to then take that to then send it to a lithium carbonate downstream facility?
No, if you take live vent, the facility's right there at the Salar, and you hit it with soda ash, and
So
it
straight
becomes
into
lithium
the
carbonate.
downstream, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no mid step. It's pretty
We're
much.
not doing midstream. That's a WA thing.
So there's technically no like up. Essentially the evaporation is the upstream process, and then that goes straight to the downstream.
Yeah. See, I don't. Carbonate to us was always the final step of the upstream, and downstream started at hydroxide because we took sellable carbonate and converted it into hydroxide. So the terminology is changing. You Aussies have really effed up the whole.
Sorry, you can tell. Bloody, imagine how much I talk about mining every day, and I'm confused as fuck. So, like, you imagine the retail punter, but.
No, but that's a very salient point, because what you're hearing now is look at Galan. They want to do lithium chloride as their product, and Glencore signed off on a deal that's either lithium chloride or lithium carbonate. So then if it's lithium chloride, you have to take it to a facility to turn it into a chemical. That would be, I think I'll give Chris Reed credit, because I heard him say liquid spodumene once. I picked up on it. Now everybody talks about chloride as liquid spodumene, but I always give credit where credit is due. So shout out to Chris Reed for first articulating
that term.
Joe, you've touched on one aspect that's misunderstood about lithium brine projects. I'm keen to hear, what are the other sort of major aspects of brine companies that are misunderstood out there?
Well, you do have a very delicate ecosystem in the Atacama. So there are concerns. There's tourism around there. I was there a year ago this month and talked to a lot of people. I talked to the mayor of the area around where SQM's operations are. And when Boric got elected and he made this pronouncement about nationalization and everything else, I didn't find anybody who thought that was necessarily a good thing, because they said it doesn't matter. All the money's going to go to Santiago anyway, whether it's a democratically elected leader or a democratically elected communist leader. They're going to get all the money. I mean, there was a very cynical attitude in the Atacama towards how they would be treated in the new regime. What they were concerned about is that all the sins of the past are not committed. And I'm not going to go, you can do some study on that if you want to, but SQM has been accused of many things.
They've got a colorful history.
And, Albemarle's not totally clean either. But, I think both those companies know going forward, they're under such scrutiny. SQM's done a lot to launder their image. And I don't say that in a cynical way. I mean, I think they have made real changes, but they know going forward, especially in the new regime where their existing contract runs out in 2030. So they've got to negotiate now with Codelco, who's the nominated negotiator for the government, as to what they do to extend their agreement beyond 2030. Because as it stands right now, if they don't get a new agreement, they have to turn the keys over to the landlord. And I did a podcast with the head of Corfo, and it was the only podcast I've had with 100,000 downloads. Eduardo Bertrand a few years back, and he explained that basically the Atacama is owned by Corfo, and Albemarle and SQM are renters. And that was his analogy, that if you owned a house and somebody started messing with your house, you wouldn't be happy. And that's the way he felt about how both Albemarle and SQM had treated that asset. So
I'd heard you say in your recent podcast that SQM were just trying to produce as much lithium as possible. It makes sense given prices where they are, they can still make a good margin. But a couple years ago, they committed to something like halving their brine extraction over the next decade. Do you know a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's do two things. First of all, because one of the analysts asked them about, well, if you get this deal with Codelco, or is it going to be Katie bar the door and you're just going to start cranking out more because you can? And Ricardo Ramos, to his credit, said, "Hey, that's not the way this thing works. We have to take care of the Mother Nature and the ecosystem, and we can't just do what we would do to get the most out of it because we have to worry about the water issues that are in existence right now." And so he was fairly, it was an interesting response because it was very clear that they're going to produce as much as they responsibly can. And he really put it back on the guy who asked the question, kind of made him look a bit foolish that, we're good stewards of the land. And, if within the bounds of propriety and how we manage this resource, we can do more, we will do more, but we're not going to mess with the water table. We're not going to do things that would damage the ecosystem. And that kind of rhetoric is what you hear from SQM now. And in the past, maybe they weren't so sensitive, but I am, for most of the last decade, I've been a supporter of SQM in terms of I had a good relationship with the prior CEO, and I think they've been trying to do the right thing for several years now. And you have the whole narrative about Ponce being the son-in-law of Pinochet, which isn't 100% true because that marriage was annulled, and if the marriage was annulled, it never happened. And that was when I went to Mr. Ponce's house and met him a few years ago. That was the first discussion we had about the fact that they always say I'm Pinochet's son-in-law, but when your marriage is annulled, technically it never happened. So I'm really not his son-in-law. You don't get this stuff anywhere.
Oh, mate, talk about word on the decline, marital affairs.
So your first response there, you use this word steady state when the ponds get to steady state. And so, I'm just keen to kind of unpack, why the Atacama is special when it comes to these brine operations actually getting to steady state.
Well, it's not special in getting to steady state. It's special because of the quality of the brine and if you're running 1,500 ppm on that side of the Andes and you're running 600 to 700 ppm or less on the other side of the Atacama. There's obviously an advantage to having a higher concentration. But any pond system can be disrupted. It can be disrupted by weather, rain. It can be disrupted by running it too hard and running the concentration of lithium down too low. And that happened to Livent when it was FMC Lithium.
What does that mean, Joe?
That means if you're trying to put a 3% brine into your system and you have rain, so that dilutes it a little bit. In rain in the Atacama is not much of a problem because it's the driest place on earth and the rain tends to get evaporated quickly. On the other side of the Andes, it rains more and the evaporation characteristics aren't as good. So you want to run your last pond, your final solar brine, you want it to be within certain parameters. And if it gets outside of those parameters, then you have a problem. So it just, your costs go up. And you also have issues with if one of your ponds, your pond management isn't to the point where what's going from pond 2 to pond 3 is in the right sequence, and it has too much of what was supposed to be removed, then you're going to have issues with the quality of your product. And brine operations are seasonal. And that's what the Japanese always used to call me up and say, Lowry-san, how come your calcium's higher? Or how come this is higher? And all I said was, man, we're selling to a spec and it's in spec. But the conversations with the Japanese were always to the point of, they showed me control charts and you're migrating towards the upper limit, blah, blah, blah. And they we're great at charting the history. I mean, if you've been supplying somebody for 10 years and they got every lot and they just dump it into some software and they said, this is what you're moving. And we want to see the variation. We want to see the variability as low as possible. So ponds are sensitive. They're tricky. It's not a simple thing. And the thing that invariably when people would come to South America to see lithium operations, they would either go to the Atacama first, or they would come to Argentina first and then go to the other side. And invariably when people were coming in the 10, 20 years ago, they would go to the Atacama and tell me, these guys look like they're farmers and you guys are doing chemistry. Because we had absorption columns, we had what looked like a fancier operation, and there was always the thought, because especially SQM back then was running it for potash, that lithium was getting short shrift. That is no longer the case.
Joe, I want to change tacks for a minute now while we're in the lithium triangle there and talk about geopolitics. So there's been some interesting events, obviously the election not too long ago in Argentina, and then you touched on already the national policy for lithium in Chile. I mean, to start with, if you had a project in that triangle, which country would you be picking at the moment?
I would pick Argentina simply because there's no clear policy in Chile outside of the Atacama right now. We don't know how that's going to play out. And I have a lot more experience. I mean, been going to Argentina for 30 years. And despite the economic chaos that exists in Argentina, they have a unique ability to get stuff done through the chaos. And I think Milei's election, he's going to have a lot of trouble trying to do what he wants to do, but I think it's very positive for lithium because he's a free marketer. There's been a lot of talk in Argentina over the last few years about, they look at their neighbors across the Andes and what they did, and they're literally, SQM pays billions a year now. And who would have ever thought 5 years ago that lithium would pay more than copper into the national coffers of Chile? That thought would have got you institutionalized not too long ago. But it is, in fact, the case. In 2022, there was more money going into the government coffers in Chile from lithium than copper. And
on the front of SQM, they've, like one of their biggest shareholders, they're 1/4 from memory owned by Chinese groups. Can you see anything like that changing as a result of this policy? Well, I do not think that, Tanchi's, whatever it is, 23.6, 24%, I'm not sure what the exact number is right now. That was probably the worst move Jiang Weiping ever met because he bought high and it almost bankrupted Tanchi, that the money he borrowed for that. And that was really the reason why I had the conversation I had with Mr. Ponce. Was he was just asking me what I thought the Chinese intended. And I do believe at the time Jiang Weiping thought he could take SQM out. And I could be wrong about that, but that was a laughable thought to the Chileans, that they would let Chinese come in and just take over. But I'll tell you that if they continue down the path with the policy they have now, where the government gets a 51% carried interest on new lithium projects, I think the only guys that are going to go for that are the Chinese. So maybe in the end, the Chinese win, but it's not going to be Tanchi. And did the Chinese kind of have to do that? Because there's been a bit of pushback across all Western countries, Canada and Australia, but the Chinese have been pretty clear in their, search for the rock, as Chris Ellison would say. And they've obviously wrapped up or got stakes in a lot of significant African lithium projects too. But do you see, Chile being perhaps one of the main outlets for their desire to get a hold of, product?
Yeah, unless you believe Goldman Sachs, because if you read the report that I tweeted about not too long ago, Goldman Sachs says China will overtake Australia as the largest producer of lithium from their own resources in 2027, which I find completely laughable. But that's
Is
what,
that
that's
just
what's
based
in
on
there.
lepidolite, is it?
Is that referencing
No,
just
it's
in country
Yeah,
or their stakes?
in country. If you
Wow.
can look at that tweet and blow it up, you see all the detail. They say it goes to, in 2027. China would eclipse, and that's a combination of lepidolite, brine, and spodumene, and that is to me laughable.
I'm interested to flesh out the lepidolite idea in China, because it's been my understanding, and I think all of us in the room here, that that's one of the higher cost operators globally. And given the environment where we're in, where we've hit I think 1,400 spod price recently, I mean, where do they sort of sit on the cost curve? How long do they stay in the game as we see these fluctuations in the lithium price?
Okay, so you guys, let's see, how many minutes did it take you to go back to Hard Rock? I'm just saying.
I think we said X Hard Rock WA.
It's a fair question. It really depends on the typical mining things. What's the strip ratio? What's the grade? But you don't have any lepidolite that supports Goldman's $10,000, $10,114 second half of 2024 price, because lepidolite's going to be mid-teens to $30 depending on the situation. And if you get into a world, and if you look at the Goldman's numbers, where 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 tons of global supply are Chinese lepidolite, that sets the cost umbrella. So you're not going to have, it makes no sense for them to talk about the lepidolite, but then say the carbonate price is going to 10,000. It literally makes no sense, because there is no world where lepidolite supports that. And I don't know. I mean, even if you want to put your commodity hat on and say it's not a specialty chemical, commodity economics are commodity economics. So it was like when Morgan Stanley in one of their earlier iterations said, carbonate's going to be 8,300-ish in 2030, but spodumene's going to be 1,300 or whatever it was. And you just couldn't do the math on how you could have that world work.
Yeah. Quite an arbitrage opportunity there. So to tap us back into line,
the smartest guy in the room, right there.
He loves
you're going to make me blush, mate.
Like you mentioned the retail punter there, Matty, and how is a retail punter? What are they supposed to look for when they're evaluating developers in the space? Like, what are the high points on kind of what actually makes a good development project in brine?
Yeah, and I think it's very similar to, grade is a very important thing. So that's why the Atacamas, the green bushes of brine. And then you look at what are the impurities, and then what are the logistics. I mean, these places, you think Kalgoorlie's remote or Port Hedland's remote, go up to freaking Hombre Muerto, and it's at over 4,000 meters in the middle of nowhere. There's only vicuña and pink flamingos up there. There's not a lot of other wildlife, and you're in a very remote place. So brine, brine's a tough, if you look at all the projects on the map in Argentina, you don't have enough water to do all of them, because at the end of the day, you still have to use processed water, and you have to have enough of it. And if you start looking at going from 35 to 37,000 tons, whatever it was last year, that's rough numbers, to 400,000 tons in a 7-year turn, that's probably not going to happen. It's just logistics, labor, and water are all significant issues up in the Puna.
What are the green bushes of the brine industry? What are the top, like the world-class brine operations?
Well, it's Atacama uberalis. I mean, that's just end of story. We don't have, there is no DRC brine that we can continue to talk about why it doesn't get developed. But the thing is our quality when I worked for Livent was always the best because we had a lower concentration of brine, but we didn't have a lot of nasties that we had to take out either. So it was a very clean process. And even though, when people talk about battery quality or battery grade, 99.5, nobody cares about the assay, really. They care about the stability of the impurities in the 0.5 or the 0.7 or the 0.2, whatever the assay is. And you could have a 99.8% lithium carbonate that didn't pass spec because the rest of it was, mostly sodium or something like that. I mean, it just, it's tricky. And I mean, you never have had a bunch of brine producers. I mean, if you look at history, it was the two in the Atacama and what's now Livent, and then Orocobre got into the mix, and now you have Cachara. You only have 5 besides what you have in Western China that are really operating right now. So it's a small universe. As you start to go, and I'm a little disappointed, you guys. I mean, let's talk about oil field brines and
that's coming up.
Okay. I just want to keep you guys honest. This is if we only had what's in South America for brine, the world would be in trouble. Because you need a lot. I mean, if you really want a 50% to 70% EV world and a lot of energy storage system capacity for renewables, just South America with brine and just Australia for hard rock isn't going to get the job done.
Before we get right into DLE, Big Joe, sum up the process for us in contrast to brine evaporation.
You pump up the brine, it goes through the direct extraction process, and then you have a carbonate plant ready solution in hours or day rather than months. And that's what the purveyors of technology to venture capitalists like to focus on. But the point I've already said it once on this podcast, I'll say it again, is that once a pond system's in steady state, DLE has no time advantage over it. The real promise of DLE, besides the fact that you can use it in places where you can't do ponds, is you have higher recoveries and potentially better quality.
And what's that process? Is it what is it, electrolysis or something? How do they extract it out?
Well, there's 3 types of DLE. Well, there might be 4, but I'll just talk about 3. There's just a sorbent. You run it through the columns, pulls off the lithium, then you wash it off, and you have a lithium bearing solution. Ion exchange. I think most people know what ion exchange is. One goes one place, one goes the other. And then membranes, where you have a membrane that will allow one thing through and won't allow other things through. Most of what I think you're going to see happen is more with the sorbents than, I mean, you take a company like Lilac, is ion exchange, I believe. Actually, I know. But so then you have, if you're doing a process where you have to add things to the solution, and reinjection is going to be a problem. That's really where the battle is right now, to get approval to run these DLE operations, and then just to prove to the government that if you reinject what you pull out immediately back in, that it's not going to do any damage to brine operation, or what's below the surface. And a leader in that field is ZELANDEZ.com.
So is DLE, is it proven or not? Has it been proved successful anywhere yet?
Well, if you want to talk about hybrid DLE, which is what I would say Livent does because they still have ponds. We never called it DLE when I was at Livent. I never heard that term once in 23 years. But they call it DLE now because it's on brand. So I would say DLE is going to happen, and you will have very successful operations that don't have to have ponds. But right now, Sunresin will claim in Qinghai province they have produced, tens of thousands of tons a year. And I talked to the guy and I said, well, yeah, but you got ponds at all those operations. I said, so you're basically like Livent. And he says, yeah, but we have 2 pilot operations. I think they're, 5 tons a year or whatever. And Gary, if you listen to this, you can email me.
You hear that name all the time in the conversation of DLE, Sunresin. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Sunresin. Yeah, you got to give them credit, and they're in South America too. And some of the U.S. operations that are trying to do DLE are using Sunresin's technology, and that's fine. But they don't have a full-scale plant operating anywhere. It's like 40,000 tons that's using pure DLE, and maybe they will in 2 years. I can't say. If I take China out of it, the issue is, if you're a major, you want to do a pilot, and there have been several successful pilots. Then you want to do a demo plant, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 tons. Well, you might take 2 years building that thing and then running enough hours of brine operation through it where you're comfortable. And that's where, take a Rio Tinto, take people that are on Rincon. These guys are all doing pilot, then demo. And once you have a successful demo, then you build the full scale thing. But we're in the end of 2023 and nobody's got a big demo running yet. So South America is still several years away from ramping up a full scale DLE operation. And look at what Lake Resources. I mean, they're the next great thing. And then all of a sudden, we have 3 years delay. You have the CEO of Lilac, who's a partner in Lake, says, we're 10,000 times faster than the pond guys. I said, well, 10,000 times faster, and you just announced a 3-year delay. How does that work?
Right, Mr Lithium, part 1 is done. Right, from that, we're going to go straight into, I think, JD, you're going to get into the word. You lead it off about the recent news last week about Exxon. Exxon getting into the what would you say, the oil field brines with the deep drilling technology, and are they going to be a big player? Yep,
get into the technical bits of DLE as well as the sedimentary projects, which
Thacker Pass.
Thacker Pass.
That's an interesting one. The big free dig bloody clay, just rip it up and process shitloads of it. Will it work?
That's it. And we touched on bits about China, what's going on there. Are they going to become a major miner of lithium, as well as bits about supply, demand, hydroxide versus carbonate?
Down. So pretty much everything we didn't talk about in part 1, we talk about everything else minus spodumene.
No,
spodumene found its way in there, didn't it?
Spot in there.
Oh, it's hard. It's hard not to. It's just like it's magnetic.
Alrighty, couple of sponsors to thank, Matty.
Oh, we do, and we've got to get ready for the sponsor drinks. We're hosting drinks today.
It's gonna be a blast.
The perk of being a money of mine partner, a little bit of a piss up every now and then to engage with the other sponsors, and for us to show our appreciation of what the sponsors mean to us by giving them free alcohol.
Absolutely, and who are those sponsors?
Oh, mate, who aren't they? Who aren't they is the question while I scroll down and get the full list.
DSI Underground.
KCA Site Services.
Terra Capital, McMahon Mining Title Services, Future Proof Consulting, Anytime Exploration Services, KCA said, JP Search at the top of the show, Brooks Airways.
And K-Drill.
K-Drill.
Hooroo.
I actually told Q, I said, Ryan O'Sullivan's going to be at the Drinks the Savage if you want to come along, but he's got like parent-teacher interviews.
Fair enough.
He's a bit let there. He's
Next
a bit
time.
Devo. Righto, hooroo, money miners.
Hooroo.
Keep talking if you want, Trav. It's all good.
The information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation, and needs.